The air in my father's office on Capitol Hill was thicker than the flak over Kandahar, but a hell of a lot more suffocating. It smelled of things I had learned to despise: aged leather, the cloying sweetness of Cuban cigar smoke, and the metallic tang of unspoken disappointment. Outside the tall, bulletproof windows, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the National Mall, but here in the oak-paneled sanctuary of Senator Franklin Hayes, the only light came from a green banker's lamp that illuminated the chessboard of his political life. He swirled the bourbon in his crystal tumbler, the ice clinking like a slow, deliberate countdown. He wasn't my father in this room. He was the senator, a titan of the Armed Services Committee, a man who moved fleets with a signature and careers with a whisper. I stood at parade rest before his massive desk, my flight suit feeling alien and out of place against the Persian rug, the faint scent of jet fuel a defiant trespass in his world of power and perfume. "Maya," he began, his voice that carefully curated baritone that could soothe a donor or gut an opponent with equal ease. "This rapid evac project of yours. We need to talk about it." I kept my gaze fixed on the portrait of Teddy Roosevelt behind him. "Don't show him anything. Don't let him see it get to you. It's a utopian toy, Maya. A pipe dream," he continued, placing the glass down with a heavy thud. The verdict had been delivered. And worse, it's becoming a political liability. The budget is already stretched thin. My colleagues are asking questions. They see a major playing with expensive gadgets while we're trying to fund proven platforms. His words were precise, each one a perfectly aimed shot. He wasn't just dismissing my work, he was dismissing me. He was trivializing the years of research, the sleepless nights I'd spent coding and designing after pulling 10-hour shifts in the A-10 simulator, the memory of every fallen soldier that fueled the entire damned project. My mother, Evelyn Hayes, shifted in her leather wingback chair, a vision of tailored silk and quiet influence. She was the perfect political spouse, her smile a weapon and her grace a shield. "Darling," she said, her voice smooth and cool as marble, "it's time to think about the family's legacy. Your brother, Kevin, is making history with his campaign strategies. He understands the real battlefield is here, in Washington. And you're out there playing with drones. Playing with drones." The phrase hung in the air, dripping with condescension. She didn't see the face of Corporal Evans, bleeding out in the Hellman dust, his life slipping away in the 15 minutes it took for the medevac chopper to get clearance to land in a hot LZ. My drones weren't a game. They were the answer to a promise I'd made to a ghost. They were small, autonomous, armored carriers designed to fly where helicopters couldn't, to retrieve a wounded soldier from under direct fire. They weren't a toy. They were the difference between a flag-draped coffin and a homecoming. "I've taken care of it," my father announced, cutting through my silent fury. He sounded proud, as if he'd just solved a complex problem for a child. "I've spoken with General Miller. There's a position for you at the Pentagon. A staff role. Good visibility, safe, respectable. It's time you came in from the cold, Maya. This obsession has to end." He was offering me a gilded cage, a desk job, a slow, soul-crushing retirement from 30,000 feet. He threatened me then, not with a raised voice, but with the cold, quiet certainty of a man who held all the cards. "Your career in the Air Force, everything you've built, can vanish with a single phone call." "Do you understand me?" I said nothing. My jaw was clenched so tight I could feel my teeth ache. They saw a political problem. An inconvenient daughter who refused to play her part in their grand dynastic theater. They saw a risk to their carefully constructed legacy. But as their judgment settled over me like a shroud, my fingers brushed against the crisp, folded paper in the breast pocket of my flight suit. It was tucked away, a secret warmth against my chest. It wasn't a formal order from the Pentagon. It was better. It was an unofficial letter of intent, scrawled on dusty letterhead from a forward operating base, whose location was classified. It was from a Tier 1 unit, the kind of men who didn't care about political optics or budget committees. They cared about one thing: bringing their brothers home. They had seen the simulations. They understood the potential. They wanted my utopian toy. My parents saw a liability. Those soldiers saw a lifeline. And as I stood there in that silent, suffocating office, I knew their verdict was the only one that mattered. The old Jeep Gladiator's engine ticked rhythmically as it cooled, a metronome counting down the seconds to another lonely night. I sat in the near-empty parking lot of Wright-Patterson, the Ohio sunset bleeding orange and purple across the vast airfield. The heat shimmering off the asphalt reminded me of another place, another sun, another lifetime ago. 3 years to be exact, but time is a funny thing for a ghost. Syria, the word itself tastes like dust and regret. I wasn't on the ground. I was a god in a machine, circling miles above a nameless valley in an AC 130J Ghost Rider. My world was the cool, sterile glow of infrared screens, a symphony of destruction orchestrated with a joystick. Down below, a squad of Marines was pinned down, their reality a cacophony of incoming rounds and screams. My job was to be their guardian angel, their Valkyrie. Then came the call. Valkyrie 1-1, this is Reaper 6. We have a man down, GSW to the chest. Repeat, man down. Need immediate casevac. The voice belonged to a young sergeant, a kid from Iowa named Miller. I never saw his face, but I knew his voice better than my own brother's. For 2 hours, it had been my lifeline to the chaos below, calm and professional even as hell broke loose around him. But now there was a tremor in it, a crack in the professional facade. Roger, Reaper 6, I responded, my own voice a mask of calm. Black Hawk is 5 mics out. I watched on my screen as the medevac helicopter, a dark cross against the pale earth, attempted its approach. The first time, a storm of tracer fire erupted from a ridgeline, forcing it to peel away. The second time, a rocket-propelled grenade streaked past its tail rotor, close enough to make the pilot curse over the shared channel. The ground was too hot. They couldn't land. Then Miller's voice came again, strained, losing its fight against panic. Valkyrie, where is that bird? He's bleeding out. Got him it, he's bleeding out right here. I could see the heat signature of the wounded Marine, a flickering candle in the encroaching darkness. A few hundred feet above him, the Black Hawk circled, a chariot of salvation held at bay. And there I was, higher still, with enough firepower to level a city block, but utterly powerless to stop a single piece of shrapnel from doing its job. I could rain down cannon fire, but I couldn't stitch a wound. I couldn't stop the bleeding. His last transmission wasn't a call for help. It was just a whisper. Tell my mom I love her. Then, silence. The candle flickered out. That silence is the foundation of my obsession. That's the legacy I carry, not the one my parents drone on about at their cocktail parties in Georgetown. Their legacy is about securing funding, lobbying senators, celebrating the launch of a new fighter jet with champagne and canapes. It's a legacy written in contracts and press releases. Mine was forged in a dusty valley, written in the blood of a young man who died, because help was a few hundred feet away, but might as well have been on the moon. I slammed my fist against the Jeep's dashboard, the plastic groaning in protest. The frustration was a physical thing, a hot coal in my chest. It was that same fire that led me to Chief Master Sergeant Sarge Malone. He was the only one who didn't look at me like I was crazy. Everyone else, from the colonels to the project managers at DARPA, saw the obstacles. Sarge only saw the mission. We found a forgotten hangar at the edge of the base, a dusty cathedral of corrugated steel. After my shifts, we'd work late into the night, fueled by stale coffee and his unwavering belief. We cobbled together my first prototypes from scrap heaps and discarded drone parts. The Valkyrie wasn't born in a sterile lab. It was born there, amidst the smell of oil, sweat, and ozone. I can still feel the weight of a wrench he'd place in my hand, his own hands calloused and scarred from a lifetime of fixing things that were broken. Don't let the suits in Washington tell you what's impossible, Major. He'd grumble, his eyes twinkling under the bare workshop lights. They're real good at countin' money, not so good at countin' lives. He died last year. A sudden heart attack while mowing his lawn on a Saturday morning. Just like that, the only unconditional support I had was gone. He left me the schematics, the half-finished airframe, and a silence that was almost as deafening as the one from Miller's radio. My fingers found the worn leather cover of the notebook on the passenger seat. It was Sarge's, filled with his chicken scratch handwriting, complex equations, and greasy fingerprints. I'd been through it 100 times, searching for some spark of genius I might have missed. I flipped through the familiar pages, the rustle of paper a lonely sound in the quiet truck. But then my thumb caught on 2 pages stuck together near the back. A smear of dried adhesive, maybe from a coffee spill. I'd never noticed it before. Carefully, I worked my nail between them. The pages separated with a soft tear, revealing a page I'd never seen. It wasn't an equation or a schematic. It was a name and a set of coordinates, scrawled in Sarge's hurried script. Dr. Eris Thorne, it read, and beneath it, not a military base, but a location deep in the Nevada desert, marked only with the word ghost. The workshop smelled of progress. It was a cocktail of hot coffee, ozone from the soldering irons, and the faint, metallic scent of machined aluminum. For weeks, this cramped hangar at the edge of the base had been our sanctuary, our war room, and our home. My team, a scrappy trio of engineers who believed in the rapid evac project as much as I did, had been running on fumes and sheer willpower. But we were getting there. Sergeant Miller and his ranger buddies were our secret weapon. They'd drop by after their training runs, their faces still smeared with camo paint, and offer the kind of feedback you can't get from a simulation. "Hey, Major, the latch on the payload bay needs to be operable with one hand, wearing gloves, in the dark," Miller would say, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. We'd listen. We'd adapt. We built a drone not for a spec sheet, but for the bleeding kid in the dirt waiting for a lifeline. And it was working. The Valkyrie, our prototype, was a thing of beauty. She wasn't sleek or elegant like the Predator drones my father's company built. She was functional, rugged, a flying mule designed to carry plasma and medical supplies into hell and back. Her guidance system was rock solid, her flight pattern stable even in simulated crosswinds that would have grounded other birds. We'd finally done it. We'd scheduled a full-scale field test at Fort Bragg. This was our shot. Our Super Bowl. A successful demonstration meant a pathway to real funding, to moving this from a passion project to a piece of life-saving equipment. The energy in the week leading up to it was electric. We double-checked every circuit, ran diagnostics until our eyes burned, and packed the Valkyrie into its transport case with the care of parents sending their kid off to college. We even threw a small BBQ outside the hangar, a rare moment of calm. Miller grilled burgers. The engineers argued about the finer points of Star Trek, and for a few hours, we were just a team on the cusp of something great. The future felt bright, tangible. I allowed myself to hope. That hope died around 10 in the evening, just 48 hours before we were scheduled to ship out. I was in the workshop alone, running one last redundant systems check, when the email landed in my inbox. The subject line was sterile, bureaucratic Ray. Field Test Authorization Project Rapid Evac. The sender was some administrative colonel I'd never heard of. My heart sank before I even opened it. The text was brief, a masterpiece of passive-aggressive officialese. The demonstration was to be indefinitely postponed. The reason given was a single, chilling phrase due to safety concerns raised at the congressional level. Congressional level. The words felt like ice water in my veins, sharp and suffocating. This wasn't a standard logistical hiccup. This wasn't about weather or a double-booked training range. This was a targeted strike. A sniper shot from 1,000 yards away, aimed right at the heart of my project. I stared at the screen, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. I could almost feel the phantom ache in my leg, the one that always flared up when the past came calling. There was only one person I knew with the power to pull strings like that, to turn a senator into a weapon, one person whose influence was a poison that seeped into everything it touched. My hands were shaking, but my movements were precise. I pulled out my personal cell and scrolled to a number I hadn't called in years. Dave Reynolds. We'd served together in a different life before he traded his flight suit for a desk at the Pentagon. He owed me one. A big one. He picked up on the third ring. "Maya, is everything okay? It's a little past midnight here. I need you to do something for me." "Dave." "No questions asked," I said, my voice tight. "Project Rapid Evac. I need to know who just put a congressional hold on my Fort Bragg field test." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing, the subtle calculus of favors and risks running through his mind. "That's a tall order, Major," he said finally. "You're asking me to stick my neck in a political meat grinder. You owe me, Dave. Remember Bagram?" I didn't have to say more. Another sigh. "Stay on the line. Don't hang up." I waited, the silence of the hangar pressing in on me. I listened to the faint hum of the servers, the distant sound of a C-130 taking off. 10 minutes stretched into an eternity. When he came back on, his voice was a whisper. "I can't give you a name, Maya. It's firewalled 6 ways from Sunday. But the inquiry came from the Senate Armed Services Committee. An urgent request for clarification on the drones, proprietary guidance and navigation software. It's a classic poison pill. It's designed to tie you up in hearings and reviews for months, maybe years, until your funding dries up and everyone forgets you ever existed." My throat was dry. "The guidance system," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "The one component we'd sourced from a small, innovative startup instead of a major defense contractor. Instead of a contractor like my father's." "It's a ghost, Maya," Dave said, his voice laced with pity. "A perfectly legal, perfectly deniable assassination. Whoever did this is a pro." I thanked him and hung up. I didn't need a name. I knew the artist by their signature. This wasn't a frontal assault, it was a political backstab, delivered with a smile and a handshake in some mahogany-paneled DC office. It had my father's fingerprints all over it. Subtlety. Power. The complete, utter conviction that his way was the only way, and anything that challenged it had to be crushed. I stood there in the silent workshop, the Valkyrie sitting in its case like a caged eagle. He thought he could bury me in paperwork. He thought I'd just roll over and let my project die. He was wrong. He'd taught me how to fight, after all. He just never expected I'd use those lessons against him. I walked over to my terminal and pulled up the flight schedules for DC. This wasn't going to be a battle fought in a hangar or on a testing range. This was a war, and the next battlefield was Capitol Hill. And I was coming for him. The rejection letter from the Pentagon felt heavier than body armor. Each word was a perfectly polished, politically sanitized bullet point designed to kill a dream without leaving a messy wound. Logistical redundancies. Budgetary realignment. Re-evaluation of strategic priorities. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic assassination. My project, Rapid Evac, the drone that was supposed to save our own from impossible situations, was dead. Grounded before it ever truly flew, my boots stuck to the floor of the rusty bolt, a dive bar just outside the wire that smelled of stale beer, regret, and pine sol. This was where careers went to die, or at least to get blackout drunk, before reporting for duty the next morning. I signaled for 3 cheap beers and sent a 2-word text the bolt now. Captain Ben Carter was there in 15 minutes. He slid into the worn vinyl booth across from me, his calm, analytical eyes taking in the crumpled letter on the table and the defeated slump of my shoulders. He didn't say a word, just nodded at the bartender to bring his beer over. Ben, my UAS genius, the man who could make a drone dance on the head of a pin from 1,000 miles away, had always been a man of few words. His silence was more comforting than 1,000 platitudes. Tech Sergeant Maria Flores arrived a few minutes after him, still smelling faintly of hydraulic fluid and determination. She wiped a smudge of grease from her cheek with the back of her hand, leaving a faint streak. Her knuckles were perpetually busted, her fingernails never truly clean. She was the heart of our machine, the one who could turn my theoretical designs into a functioning, roaring piece of hardware with nothing but a wrench and a string of inventive Spanish curses. She sat, grabbed a beer, and looked at me. "Spit it out, Major. You look like you just watched your dog get run over." So I did. I laid out the whole ugly story. The subcommittee meeting, the smirking colonel from acquisitions, General Davies's final, sterile sign-off. I told them Valkyrie was being shelved, our funding cut, our team officially reassigned to projects of more immediate relevance. I pushed the letter towards them. "It's over," I said, the words tasting like ash. "You're both cleared. Your records are clean. You can walk away from this mess, and I'll understand. Hell, I'd recommend it." Ben took a long pull from his bottle, his gaze fixed on me. He let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. Major, I bet my entire career on you, the day I saw your first blueprint. I've pissed off 2 colonels and a bird dog from DARPA to stay on this team. Quitting now? That's not just quitting. That's being a coward. I'm not a coward. Maria hadn't touched the letter. She was busy using a napkin to clean a spot of oil from her worn combat boots. Without looking up, she spoke, her voice low and steady. My dad ran a garage back in El Paso. He had this saying. He'd tell me, Mija, when a door closes in your face, you don't waste time looking for another one to knock on. You find the weakest part of the goddamn wall and you kick it down. She looked up then, her dark eyes locking onto mine. And that was it. Not a lightning strike from the heavens, but a quiet, fierce spark ignited by a grease-stained sergeant in a forgotten corner of a military bar. A wall. We'd been trying to get through the Dude's reinforced, steel-plated door, but they weren't the only game in town. I sat up straighter, the fog of defeat beginning to burn away. What if we stopped trying to kick their door? I said, the idea taking shape as I spoke. What if we find a different wall? A weaker one. Ben frowned. What are you talking about, Maya? We pivot, I said. The energy surging back into me, hot and fast. We change the mission. The Pentagon is choked by politics. But what if we go somewhere the need is more important than the paperwork? We're going to pitch rapid evac to FEMA. They stared at me. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the sticky table. Think about it. Forget combat zones for a minute. Think about home. A hurricane hits the Gulf Coast. An earthquake levels a city block in California. First responders can't get into unstable buildings. But we can. Our drone isn't dropping bombs, it's dropping supplies. It's a 30-pound angel of mercy. It can deliver water, blood plasma, medicine, a radio right into a collapsed structure where survivors are trapped. We'll prove its worth here, saving American lives on American soil. Let's see some pencil pusher in Washington argue with that headline. A slow grin spread across Ben's face. Civilian application. A humanitarian angle. It's brilliant. They can't say no to that without looking like monsters. Maria picked up her beer, a glint of the old fire back in her eyes. So we're kicking down a wall, she said with a smirk. I can build the boot for that. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. We weren't a disbanded project team, we were a squad again. A band of misfits with a new, impossible mission. I raised my bottle. To kicking down walls. To kicking down walls, they echoed, clinking their bottles against mine. Just as the glass touched, my phone buzzed on the table. A restricted number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Major Hansen speaking. A man's voice, smooth as polished marble and utterly unfamiliar, came through the line. Major, my name is Marcus Thorne. I'm a senior partner at Aerodyne Global. I happen to hear that your very promising Valkyrie program ran into a political snag today. A real shame. Perhaps my organization and yours could find a way to be mutually beneficial. The beer in my hand suddenly felt ice cold. The rejection notice had been signed less than 4 hours ago. Nobody outside the Pentagon should have known. Nobody. The pivot to FEMA felt like trading a frontal assault for an insurgency. Instead of battering down the Pentagon's armored gates, we were infiltrating the civilian sector, winning hearts and minds, one PowerPoint slide at a time. The air in those conference rooms wasn't thick with the smell of floor wax and bravado, but with the scent of stale coffee and genuine desperation. These weren't generals with stars on their collars. They were career civil servants with perpetual shadows under their eyes, people who saw disasters not as strategic opportunities, but as a tide of human suffering they were tasked to hold back. And for the first time, Valkyrie wasn't being measured against kill ratios or payload capacities. It was being measured in lives saved per hour, in the efficiency of delivering insulin to a diabetic trapped by floodwaters, in its ability to map a wildfire's edge in real time. The team and I worked around the clock, customizing simulations, running projections. One afternoon, we showed them a real-time demo. On one screen, a simulated hurricane aftermath, a flooded town in Louisiana. On the other, our Valkyrie drones launched, autonomously identifying stranded survivors on rooftops, charting safe delivery routes through debris, and air-dropping thermal blankets and communication packs. Mr. Henderson, the deputy director for response, a man whose rumpled suit and weary eyes screamed I've seen too many hurricanes, leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. You're telling me, he said, his voice raspy with disbelief, that your system can do all that, coordinated, with one operator overseeing a dozen drones. One operator overseeing 50, sir, I corrected him gently. The system does the heavy lifting. A silence fell over the room. It wasn't the cold, dismissive silence of the Pentagon. It was the sound of gears turning, of a problem that had plagued them for decades suddenly finding a solution. We were close. I could feel it in my bones, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the cheap conference room heating. A pilot program, a contract. It wouldn't be the multi-billion-dollar DoD prize, but it would be a beachhead. It would be proof. It would be a win that not even my father could ignore. Hope is a dangerous drug for a soldier. It makes you lower your guard. The call came on a Tuesday night, just as I was packing up, a rare feeling of accomplishment humming in my chest. The caller ID flashed *Kevin Hayes*. My brother. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some foolish, familial instinct made me answer. Maya, little sister. His voice slid through the phone, smooth and polished as a politician's soundbite. I hear you're making waves over at FEMA. Good for you. The condescending praise was a familiar opening salvo. It's promising work, Kevin, I said, keeping my voice level. Promising, right, he chuckled, a dry, empty sound. Listen, I'm calling because Dad's well. He's disappointed. He feels you're embarrassing the family name, going hat in hand to these civilian agencies begging for scraps. It looks desperate. The old wound throbbed, a phantom ache that mirrored the nerve damage in my leg. Begging for scraps. As if saving lives was a less noble pursuit than building bigger bombs. This scrap could save thousands of American lives, Kevin. Isn't that what the Hayes family is supposed to be about? Service? Service is one thing, Maya. Making a scene is another. You're working outside the system. Dad thinks you should let it go. Come back into the fold. Sterling Dynamics has an opening in their R&D leadership. He could make a call. The offer hung in the air, a gilded cage disguised as an olive branch. My jaw tightened. So I should abandon my project and my team to go work for the competition. The company that's been funneling money into Dad's campaigns for a decade? Kevin sighed, the practiced sigh of a man burdened by a difficult relative. It wasn't a suggestion, just some friendly advice. Think about it. He hung up. It wasn't friendly advice. It was a targeting laser painting me for an incoming strike. The dread was a physical weight for the next few days. Every email notification made me flinch. Then, on Friday morning, the news alert lit up my phone. The headline was a gut punch. *FEMA announces landmark National Aerial Disaster Response Initiative, partners with Sterling Dynamics in exclusive multi-billion-dollar deal *. I clicked the link, my hand trembling. There it was, in crisp corporate press release language. A massive, nationwide contract awarded without a competitive bid to Sterling Dynamics. The behemoth. The company that built the lumbering medevac helicopters I used to fly, relics of a bygone era. Suddenly, they were the nation's leading experts on autonomous drone relief. The article even quoted a senator, my father's closest ally, praising Sterling's innovative vision. They hadn't just outmaneuvered me. They had stolen my playbook, ripped the soul from Valkyrie, and slapped it onto their own antiquated hardware. They used my proof of concept, my success with FEMA, as the justification for a deal that shut me out completely. It was a political assassination, carried out with surgical precision by my own family. I sank into my chair, the screen glowing in the dark office. The hum of our servers felt like a funeral dirge. They thought they had won, that they had buried me under the weight of their power and influence. They thought the siege was over. They were wrong. This wasn't a surrender. It was the last radio call before you go dark and start fighting on your own terms. The call came just after 7 in the evening, when the DC sky was the color of a dying bruise. I was in the garage, my sanctuary of grease wiring and the clean scent of soldering flux. My hands, stained with oil, were deep inside the guidance housing of a prototype, tracing a logic fault. My phone buzzed against a stack of schematics, the screen lighting up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Senator Davies. My father. His voice, when I answered, was a foreign country. It was slick with a practiced charm I knew he reserved for donors and television cameras. It wasn't the voice of a father, it was the sound of an ambush being set. Maya, honey, I was hoping you were free tonight. For dinner. Just a small family thing. Family was a word he used like a weapon, a shield to hide behind. My knuckles whitened around a wrench. I'm busy, Dad. Nonsense. The Olympian Club, 8:30. Wear something nice. It wasn't a request. The line went dead before I could refuse again. The Olympian Club was everything I despised about Washington. A mausoleum of dark wood, old money, and whispered deals, where portraits of dead white men judged you from the walls. I felt their gaze as I walked in, my simple black dress feeling like armor and a costume all at once. The familiar ache in my right leg, a permanent souvenir from the Hindu Kush, chose that moment to flare up, a dull throb reminding me of a world far from this suffocating quiet. He was waiting in a private dining room, a bottle of obscenely expensive wine already breathing on the table. And he wasn't alone. Mia, wonderful to see you, my father said, his smile as wide and shallow as a puddle. I'd like you to meet Marcus Thorne. Thorne rose from his chair. He was silver-haired, impeccably tailored, with the relaxed posture of a man who owned every room he entered. His handshake was dry and firm. He was the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, our biggest competitor and a behemoth of the old guard military-industrial complex. A vulture in a bespoke suit. Major, Thorne said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. It's an honor. Your service record is the stuff of legend. I just nodded. They never talked about the service, not really. They talked about the legend, a two-dimensional cutout they could admire. They didn't want to know about the sand that gets in everything, the smell of burnt fuel, or the look in a kid's eyes when he realizes he's not going home. The dinner was a carefully choreographed performance. They steered the conversation through pointless pleasantries, praising my resilience, my ingenuity. It was like being prepped for surgery without anesthesia. Finally, over coffee, the scalpel came out. Maya, Thorne began, leaning forward and steepling his fingers. We at Sterling Dynamics have been watching your work with Rapid Evac. It's revolutionary, but a project of that scale needs resources, infrastructure. It needs a home. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I knew what was coming. We want to offer you that home, he continued. We're creating a new position, director of our Unmanned Systems Initiative. We need a leader. Someone with unimpeachable combat credentials, a face the Pentagon trusts. Someone like you. They didn't want my brain. They wanted my face. They wanted to slap my medals and my reputation onto their outdated, over-budget drones and sell them to the highest bidder. My creation, my system designed to save lives, would become a marketing tool. The silence stretched. I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something, to defend me. He just smiled his politician's smile, the closing argument ready on his lips. He delivered the killing blow without flinching. And of course, you'll bring the Rapid Evac technology with you when you join, he said, his tone casual, as if discussing the weather. Think of it as a dowry of sorts. A way to seal the deal, a dowry. The word hung in the air, archaic and obscene. He wasn't just selling my work, he was selling me. His daughter, a piece of property to be traded for political and financial gain, with my life's work as the bride price. They expected me to yell, to protest, to show the fiery emotion they'd read about in my file, but they didn't know the person who'd been forged in the cockpit of a Valkyrie. In that moment, a strange and terrible calm washed over me. The kind of hyper-focused clarity you get just before you pull the trigger, when the world slows down and you see every variable, every threat, every possible outcome. I saw them for what they were. Not a father and a CEO, but two predators who had cornered their prey, already tasting victory. They had miscalculated. They thought they were dealing with a daughter. They were dealing with a pilot. I let the silence hang for another beat, then I smiled. It wasn't my smile. It was a thin, sharp curve of my lips that held no warmth, no gratitude. It was a smile they had never seen before, and it made both of them shift uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. Thua th letter 1b0, letter 1e3nga letter 1ecb psi, Thuong Thorne, I said, my voice even and cold as the air at 30,000 feet. "This is a very generous offer. I will need to think about it." I placed my napkin neatly on the table, pushed my chair back, and stood. The ache in my leg was gone, replaced by a rigid strength. I gave them a curt, professional nod, the kind a subordinate gives a commanding officer just before walking away to execute an order. I turned and walked out of the room, my back straight, never looking back. I left them there, surrounded by their expensive wine and their stunned silence, the battle lines no longer just drawn, but carved into stone. Home wasn't an option. The word itself tasted like ash in my mouth. My apartment, with its view of the Potomac and the ghosts of 1,000 conversations with my father, felt more like an enemy position than a sanctuary. So I drove. I let the city lights of D.C. bleed into a smear of red and white in my rearview mirror, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The dull ache in my shoulder, a souvenir from my last tour, was a familiar companion in the deafening silence of the car. I ended up at a place that wasn't on any map I could legally access. A sterile, corporate leased apartment in Arlington that smelled of fresh paint and paranoia. It belonged to a man I knew only as Echo, a ghost from my past in signals intelligence, a data wizard at the NSA who owed me for a certain incident near Bagram that never made it into an official report. I plugged a burner phone into the wall and made the call. "Echo," I said, no preamble. "Major," his voice was a digitized rasp. He never wasted words. "You're calling in the marker." I confirmed, staring out the window at the anonymous cityscape. "I need to know why Sterling Dynamics has suddenly developed an intense interest in unmanned aerial evacuation systems. Specifically, mine." He was silent for a moment. "That's a big ask, Maya. Sterling is practically a wing of the Pentagon these days, your father's favorite charity." I winced at the mention of my father. "I know. That's why I'm asking you. I need the raw data, Echo. No filters. No summaries. I need to know what they're hiding." "It'll cost me," he said. "It already did," I replied, thinking of 2 men from his unit who got to go home to their families. The line went dead. Sleep was impossible. I spent the next several hours pacing the cheap carpet, fueled by black coffee and a cold, simmering rage. Just before sunrise, a courier in a bicycle helmet dropped a small, featureless package into the building's dead drop box. Inside was a single, encrypted solid-state drive. My hands trembled slightly as I plugged it into my laptop. The decryption key Echo had texted me worked on the first try. Files bloomed across my screen. Memos, internal test reports, engineering analyses, all stamped with the Sterling Dynamics logo. The truth was far, far worse than I had imagined. It wasn't about competition, it was about a cover-up. Sterling's new flagship medevac helicopter, the Vindicator, the one my father had championed on the Hill, was a flying coffin. I scrolled through report after report, my blood turning to ice. Under specific high-speed, high-stress maneuvers, a critical flaw in the avionics software could trigger what the engineers called uncommanded flight control input. A sanitized term for the stick suddenly jerking out of the pilot's hands, sending the bird into an uncontrollable spin. A death sentence for everyone on board. They knew. They had known for months. There were incident reports, simulations showing catastrophic failure, and a heavily redacted memo recommending a full grounding of the prototype fleet. A memo my father had personally helped bury under a mountain of national security rhetoric. He wasn't just helping a campaign donor win a contract. He was knowingly helping them push a product that would kill American soldiers. The faces of pilots I'd served with, the medics, the crew chiefs they flashed before my eyes. Men and women who would trust their lives to that machine. My father was helping to sign their death warrants for political gain. A single chime from my laptop cut through the roaring in my ears. It was an encrypted email, flagged with the highest priority. The sender's seal made my breath catch in my throat. Office of General James Wallace, Commander, U.S. Transportation Command. 4 stars. A living legend. The title was 6 words, urgent demo request project rapid evac. My project, my Valkyrie. The drone they had tried to kill in committee. The message was brief. General Wallace had seen my original performance report before it was buried. He didn't believe the politically motivated operational concerns my father's committee had invented. He wanted a live fire demonstration. In 1 week. A week later, I was standing in the shimmering heat of the Nevada desert. My small team, loyal to the bone, prepped Valkyrie on a dusty patch of baked earth. Across the makeshift runway, a gallery of Pentagon brass and stern-faced observers watched from the shade of a canopy. The test was simple and impossible. A rescue dummy was placed in a rocky ravine, surrounded by simulated heavy machine gun and mortar fire. It was an LZ no human pilot would ever attempt. A place the Vindicator's own performance specs admitted was a no-fly zone. I gave the command. Valkyrie rose silently, a gray specter against the brilliant blue sky. It skimmed the desert floor, its profile impossibly low, its electric motors emitting only a faint whine. It dipped into the ravine, ignoring the pyrotechnic flashes of simulated impacts that would have shredded a conventional chopper. The grappling harness deployed, secured the casualty, and retracted. Less than 90 seconds later, Valkyrie was back on the ground, the dummy safely delivered, without a single scratch on its carbon fiber chassis. The demonstration was flawless. A heavy silence hung over the observation area. Then, footsteps on the gravel. General Wallace strode over, his face unreadable, his eyes missing nothing. He stopped in front of me, ignoring the drone, his gaze locked on mine. "Major," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried across the desert. "Get your production line ready." Relief, pure and absolute, washed over me. We did it. But as the general turned to leave, my eyes scanned the crowd of observers. My gaze locked with a man in an impeccably tailored suit, standing apart from the uniformed officers. He wasn't military. He held a sterling dynamics portfolio, and his cold, calm stare wasn't one of defeat. It was a look of assessment, of recalculation. It was a promise that this fight was very, very far from over. The Transcom announcement arrived without ceremony, a single line of text in a morning flood of alerts, while I was elbow deep in a hydraulic actuator. The smell of grease and ozone hung thick in the hangar. My wrist link buzzed, displaying the words, "Project Valkyrie Expedited Acquisition Contract Awarded." That was all. No fireworks, no congratulations. Jake saw me freeze, wiped his hands on a shop rag, and walked over. "Is that it, Major?" I could only nod. We both knew this wasn't the victory lap. It was the first shot fired. Less than an hour later, my encrypted comm chimed with a message from my friend at the NSA. A single, untraceable link, and 2 words, "curtain up." The article was by an investigative journalist whose name was whispered with equal parts fear and respect in Washington. The headline hit me like a shockwave, knocking the air from my lungs. The ghost in the machine, Senator Hayes, a fatal flaw, and the soldiers who paid the price. It was all there. The forged safety certifications. The backroom deals with contractors. The specific lines of Vindicator's flight control code I had sent, highlighted like a bloodstain on a white sheet. It was a methodical, brutal dismantling of a political empire, presented not with outrage, but with the cold, irrefutable finality of a coroner's report. And at its heart was my father, Senator Thomas Hayes, exposed to the world. The fallout was immediate and absolute. His face, suddenly aged and gray, was on a constant loop on every screen in the base mess hall. I saw his press conference from the hangar, the blue light of the monitor glinting off the Valkyrie prototype's fuselage. His voice, the powerful baritone that had commanded Senate floors, was thin and brittle. He announced he would not be seeking re-election, citing the need to cooperate fully with a pending Senate ethics investigation. I felt no triumph, no righteous vindication, just a profound, aching emptiness as I watched the foundations of the House of Hayes turn to dust. They came to see me a few weeks later, just after dusk. The security gate called ahead, their names feeling alien in that context. They walked into my hangar, my world of steel, oil, and hard truths, and looked utterly lost. My mother's face was a ruin of silent tears. But it was my father who shocked me. The iron certainty was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out desperation I had never seen. He stood before me, the man who had loomed over my entire life, now diminished, a stranger in his own daughter's world. "Maya," he began, his voice raspy. "Please, tell them it was a misunderstanding. A mistake in the data? Retract it. For the family. For our name. For the first time in my life, he wasn't commanding, he was begging. I looked at his broken expression, at my mother's quiet suffering, and then at the sleek, deadly machine that I had built from their lies. I thought of Sarge Malone, of his easy laugh and the fierce loyalty in his eyes. I already forgave you, I said, my voice softer than I'd intended. I forgave you both the moment I sent that file. Forgiveness is for me so I could move on. But the truth is for them. For Sarge. For every soldier who trusted that machine. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. Our name. Dad, that name was built on a lie. I will not sacrifice the truth to save a legacy that was never real. A year later, I stood in the cool, quiet dark of a command center at Bagram Airfield. On the main screen, a dozen high-definition feeds showed the silent, graceful shapes of the 1st Valkyrie Squadron slipping through the high mountain passes of the Hindu Kush. They moved like ghosts, their sensors painting a living map of the terrain below, identifying threats long before they could materialize, watching over patrols and bringing our people home. My comm crackled. Sarge would have gotten a hell of a kick out of this, Major, Jake's voice said from the control station beside me. A lump formed in my throat. Yeah, Jake, he really would have. That same week, I received an email from the inaugural recipient of the Sarge Malone Foundation Scholarship, a bright-eyed girl whose mother was a C-17 pilot. It was a photo of her in a university engineering lab, grinning as she held up a complex circuit board. I looked from her face, full of promise, to the live feed of the Valkyries standing guard in the darkness halfway across the world. The legacy my father had wanted was one of power, etched in marble. I had built mine from scrap, grief, and code. A legacy measured not in votes bought, but in lives saved, not in a family name, but in the futures of kids like her. The sky above was no longer haunted. It was full of promise.